Hyvää huomenta. Good morning. A very warm welcome to the Bank of Finland, everybody, to our Europe Day conference, Green, Digital and Resilient Growth. My name is Elisa Newby and I'm the head of General Secretariat here at the Bank of Finland. And on behalf of our local organizing committee, I'd just like to say that it's been a real pleasure to organize this event with Bruegel, and we are so happy you were able to make this happen. Before I invite Governor Olli Rehn to introduce our first speaker, just a couple of housekeeping issues. So firstly, please note that we have media present in this event. And second, please note that this is live streamed. And finally, there will be plenty of time for discussions, for questions after each session. But please introduce yourself first and then wait for the microphone. I wish you all inspiring, wonderful day. And now, Governor Olli Rehn, please.
Thank you, Elisa, for very clear and precise instructions and warm welcome. It's indeed my great pleasure to introduce someone who might just be the only person in Brussels whose job title includes both supercomputers and internal security. Executive Vice President Henna Virkkunen, the EU's point person for, I have to be precise, tech sovereignty, security and democracy. Henna's journey began in the small Finnish town of Joutsa, where she was raised on porridge and perseverance. She moved to Jyväskylä later on, and I'm happy that in some senses the commissioner post of Finland has returned close to its roots, because it used to be in Eastern Finland with Erkki and myself and Jyrki, and now we are at least in Central Finland. Henna counts almost as a Savo person from Eastern Finland. Anyway, she entered politics around the time of Finland joining the European Union, and she has since held multiple ministerial roles, including Minister of Education, Minister of Public Administration and Local Government, and Minister of Transport. In 2014, she was elected to the European Parliament, where she served for a decade before stepping into her current role in the European Commission. And in her current role, Henna is leading the charge on the EU AI Action Plan and the Protect EU Internal Security Strategy. And she's also been instrumental in enforcing key tech regulations. But beyond the policy papers and plenary sessions and all that, Henna is an avid runner. She's completed marathons and finds that long runs provide a perfect balance to her demanding work. So whether she is negotiating with tech giants or tackling a marathon, Henna brings the same determination and grace to every challenge. So with these words, you are all welcome, and Henna, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you so much, Governor Rehn, for this very warm welcome. Dear participants, it's a great pleasure, of course, to be here in this morning and celebrate with you Europe Day, and especially because there's also two previous Finnish commissioners present, Governor Rehn and also Chairman Liikanen, who both are representing Savo also, as we heard. So thank you very much for this very kind invitation to address you today in the beautiful Bank of Finland. And of course, it's a particular pleasure to me to speak with here and be with you on Europe Day, a day when we must reflect not just on what Europe is, but also on what it must be. So I want to also congratulate now Bruegel on your very fantastic 20 years journey. When Finland became a member of the European Union 30 years ago, and we know that the last 3 decades, they have been an age of very rapid development, both for the European Union, but also for Finland. Finnish decision to join the Union followed a referendum, as we very well remember, where the majority of Finns voted yes for EU. Yes for the common market, yes for freedom of movement, and yes for European values. And in fact, that was also a time when I entered into the politics, because I was taking a part of this yes for EU movement, because I wanted to see Finland to join democratic European countries. Today we know that, and we just saw that, according to opinion poll, 74% of Europeans, they believe that their country has benefited from the EU membership. In Finland, the figure is even higher. In the latest poll, more than 80% of Finns, 81% of Finns, they said that Finland has benefited from the EU membership. And it's very, I think, a strong support for European Union and our policy, and that is also a clear signal and a mandate for us to keep working. We know that special reason behind this very high figure is, of course, the security reason. So the Finns very much see that because of the security landscape, it's super important that Finland has strong allies like we have in the European Union, and it's important to be part of such a very strong union. We are today meeting at a moment where the foundations of the global order, as we know, they are shifting. The world is not becoming less connected, but it's becoming more contested. We face accelerating competition over critical technologies. We witness assertive powers using economic tools for strategic leverage. And we can also see growing vulnerabilities in supply chains and attacks against our democratic institutions. Especially here in Finland, we have seen that everything can be weaponized, migration, our critical infrastructure. We are also facing massively disinformation, fake news, and we can see also all the time attacks against the electoral processes in different member states in the European Union. So we can see that our democracies are very much under attack. And in these times also technology, security, and democracy, they are very much interlinked. In this new reality, ensuring our strategic autonomy and technological sovereignty is, of course, essential. European economy has, for the last years, undergone unprecedented challenges that we are still confronting daily. The current geopolitical context underscores the need to speed up the green and digital transition in order to achieve resilient and sustainable growth in Europe. This does not mean turning inward. On the contrary, Europe will remain open. We are very open for businesses, but with this in mind, we want to be independent for assets that are essential to our prosperity and to our security. So we have to build up our strategic autonomy, and technology is the front line of that. Whether it's AI, chips, quantum, cybersecurity, connectivity, our ability to act independently depends on our capacity to innovate, deploy, and govern these very crucial technologies. In response, we have acted not in defensive way, but strategic way. So European Union has put in place a CHIPS Act to accelerate investments to this very critical semiconductor industry. We have published our AI Continent Action Plan, where we are setting roadmap, what kind of actions we are taking to make sure that we are very strong when it comes to AI. We have also adopted the economic security strategy to make sure that we are not dependent in any critical sector on third countries. And we have also strengthened our cybersecurity and resilience with policy, regulation, and investments. And currently, we are finalizing also our quantum strategy. We are finalizing our Space Act. We are also building up our strategic partnerships in the same time with like-minded countries and partners. But we must also be honest, we are not there yet. The Draghi report put it very clearly. Our competitiveness in the European Union is still undermined by fragmentation, underinvestment, and unnecessary complex regulation and administrative burden. Our businesses in Europe, they struggle to scale up. We lack capital for investment, and we have regulation that is sometimes so burdensome that it's also slowing down innovations. And this is why the European Commission is now undertaking an ambitious plan to simplify our rules and make sure that Europe is getting faster and easier to do business. We have to also deepen the capital markets union, encourage more private investments, and reduce dependencies in strategic sectors from raw materials, AI models to clean tech. Because true sovereignty, it's not about doing everything alone. It's about being in a position to choose with who and how we cooperate. Dear participants, about the competitiveness, which is the key priority for this Commission, we could say that we have two very key priorities for the next 5 years. They are competitiveness and security of the European Union. And now I'm especially focusing the competitiveness part. Because our approach to building it up for Europe is laid out now in the competitiveness compass, which was one of the first major decisions from the Commission when we started. And this competitiveness compass is based now very much to 3 pillars and 5 horizontal enablers. These pillars, where we are focusing now when we speak about competitiveness, it's first closing the innovation gap, especially when we look US and China. Second pillar is very much continuing our Green Deal to make sure that we are decarbonizing our economy in the same time when we are shifting to clean energy. And also it's important to underline as a third pillar the economic security. So how we are reducing now dependencies and strengthening our own supply chains. And this is how we will enable it. First part is that we will cut red tape from our businesses for them to thrive in Europe. So we are very committed to go through all our rules and legislation and look how we can cut administrative burden, red tape, how we can simplify the processes, how we can make it easier for businesses to operate in the European Union. And second element is very much about the single market. So we still know that we have too much barriers between our member states. Often we are still too fragmented, and that's why we are now taking strong actions when it comes to single market, and we are currently now finalizing our single market strategy on this perspective. And third, we will also provide incentives for the risk capital that is needed to finance innovation. We already published our first strategy on savings and investments union, and we will continue on this part to make sure also that our very promising startups and businesses, that they have also finance in Europe to scale up their businesses in Europe. And fourth part is very much about the skills and talent. We know that Europe is an aging continent, and that's why it's important that we are making sure that everybody is educated very well in the European Union, but we have to be attractive place for talented people from all over the world to come to Europe, work here, start their business here, scale up their business in the European Union. And fifth pillar on this competitiveness compass is, of course, working very closely with our member states to make sure that also the member states are taking actions when it comes to cutting bureaucracy, red tape, fastening our permitting processes. We know that sometimes it can take years and years in the European Union in some member states to really do investments because the permitting processes are so slow. So now we are taking actions in all these fields to make sure that Europe is competitive, that we have a regulatory framework that encourages innovations and investments in the European Union. This is crucial for our future. Digitalization is playing a very important role when we speak about sustainable and resilient growth. While we are talking about green and resilient growth, we should not forget that green and the digital transitions, they go very much hand in hand. Digitalization has the potential to accelerate the green transition and also to make it benefit our people and also to our economy. Digital technology can help cut global emissions by 15% and also outweigh the current 2% to 4% of global emissions caused by the ICT sector. We recently adopted the Clean Industrial Deal in the Commission, which depends on digital solutions for successful implementation, such as AI-driven and IoT-based smart grids that can improve the efficiency, lowering costs, and also cut emissions. Those smart data-driven solutions, they reduce costs and also energy needs, they cut emissions, reduce waste, enable circular products markets, and also create new markets, for instance, by making environmental benefits measurable. Also, greening the ICT sector represents significant opportunities. Energy-efficient ICT technologies are emerging thanks to a series of innovations, such as the development of low-power processors, AI-powered energy management systems, and green cloud solutions. These innovations not only meet environmental needs, but also create new business models. And this is a very important priority for the Commission. In the same time, when we see that ICT sector is super important enabler for green transition, we are aware that the ICT sector as such is also consuming a lot of energy, more and more every day on global scale, and that's why we are very much investing in very smart and energy-efficient solutions when we are speaking about data centers, when we are speaking about ICT infrastructure and solutions. So, dear participants, this Europe Day reminds us that the Union was born from a vision, not of uniformity, but of unity. That same spirit must guide us now. If we want to shape our future, we must invest in our strengths, confront our weaknesses, simplify where needed, and act together. Strategic autonomy and technological sovereignty are not goals in themselves. They are the enablers for a strong, open, and resilient Europe. So let us celebrate Europe Day not just with words, but with action. The global playing field is changing. Let's ensure Europe remains a rule maker and not a rule taker in the decades to come. So happy Europe Day for everybody. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Henna, for this excellent and insightful keynote speech to kick off the Europe Day seminar today. And now we have a chance to pose a few questions to Henna and proceed with the Q&A. So who would like to start so that I don't have to start with the first question?
It's Finnish audience, so nobody don't
Please, Pasi, and you can introduce yourself first and then pose the question. No lectures, but questions, please.
Thank you. Pasi Ikonen, Bank of Finland. A new government has assumed power in Germany. What do you think, what will be the most important adjustments to German positions on EU policies?
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, this is a very interesting day because Chancellor Merz is today also paying a visit to Brussels, and he is also meeting his key counterpart in the European Union and NATO. Today, as we know, I think until now the most important signal from the German side for the European Union has been very much the massive increasing in defense spending, because we know that European Union, we have to, and our member states, they have to take more responsibility when it comes to our common security and defense. And we know that the decisions what Germany is taking in these fields when it comes to defense industry, they have also major impacts to other European countries. And I think it has been a very important signal for us. So of course we are now expecting a lot from the new government, but I see very much that now in the next weeks, I think the decisions when it comes to our defense spending, they will be very important, and we have already heard that Germany is committed to increase their spending and investments in this field. I think that also this decisions what different member states have been taking now when it comes to defense. Defense is of course something that it's a competence of member states, but how we are supporting these actions from the Commission side is that we are organizing financing for the member states and making sure that they have also enough flexibility when it comes to their budget to increase their defense spending. And also we are supporting our research and development when it comes to defense industry, and we are also encouraging member states now to do more, invest more to defense, but also invest more together and invest more European. And I think this is very closely also connected to our technologies and technological sovereignty, because nowadays when we speak about defense industry and need to invest more to that, it's very much connected also to all our critical technologies like quantum or AI or also chips. So all these critical technologies, they are very important part of our defense. So these are now going very much hand in hand, our defense investments and our technological sovereignty. So I think also that the European Union and our member states, I think we have now much more self-confidence than we had maybe some months ago. So now everybody has realized that we really have everything what is needed to be successful. So we are the best educated continent in the world. We have very strong research and scientific sector in the European Union. We have very strong industry. So we have everything what is needed to be very successful when it comes to technologies and also the defense industry.
Thank you, Henna. And we have a particularly active audience this time for a Finnish audience. Tuomas, please.
Thank you. Tuomas Välimäki, board member at the Bank of Finland. Thanks for the great talk. You referred in your speech to technological sovereignty, as you did in your reply to Pasi. My question is simple. Do you see a role for digital euro in that process, and should we be expecting legislation on digital euro soon from the co-legislators? Thanks.
Tuomas is a member of the high-level task force on the digital euro, which is preparing digital euro for the euro system. So please, Henna.
So I think that he is much better aware of the current situation on the negotiations, maybe when it comes to digital euro. But as we know, it's also an important element when we are modernizing also our markets. And I hope that the negotiations that they are going well. And of course, I'm very willing also to hear more your feedback and views from this perspective. But of course, we have an aim to boost really the digital investments and technologies in the European Union. And of course, digital euro is also part of that, modernizing also our societies and economy.
Thank you. We count on you and the European Parliament. Minna, please.
Thank you. Hello, Minna Helle from Technology Industries of Finland. Thank you very much, Henna, for a very, very good presentation. We are very glad you hear your messages. I would like to ask, how do you envisage to make the plan concrete? Because the tasks are not easy, the challenges are big. Who do you see are the key stakeholders you can cooperate with, and what kind of challenges you see in the path of this to make these plans concrete? Thank you.
Thank you, Minna. If I'm focusing, for example, to technological part now, because we clearly have these priorities that we want to boost investments and innovations in the European Union, and at the same time we want to make sure that we are also able to take good care of our security together with our member states. When it comes to technologies, I think the key players, of course, they are very much the European companies, our SMEs, our key industries, but also, especially when it comes to these critical technologies, it's important that we are bringing together our very strong scientific field and researchers and our startups and traditional industry. For example, if I take example from the AI, European Union, we can be very successful when it comes to AI. We know that we have more researchers on AI than any other continent in the world. We have 30% more researchers on AI comparing to USA per capita, for example. And we have very strong scientific field here. We have about 7,000 startups who are working on AI, but they are lacking access to computing capacity because we don't have that kind of giant digital companies who has these supercomputers. We have our supercomputers. One of them is Lumi in Kajaani, and that's why we made a decision that we are together with member states now investing more to our supercomputers, to this computing capacity. In this year time, we will have 5 times more computing capacity in our supercomputers than we have today. And that means that we can open up this computing capacity for our startups and for our researchers to train AI and develop AI. And now the next step is that we have to bring together our traditional industries like pharma, automotive industry, energy industry, also our public sector, healthcare, together with AI developers and look at how they can apply AI. We currently have also public consultation on this topic where we are now trying to identify that what are the obstacles, why are our industry and SMEs, public sector, why they are not uptaking AI, because only 13% of European businesses is using AI. In Finland, the figure is higher. It's almost 25% Finnish companies who are using AI, but still mainly in the office work, so not so much when it's going to industrial base. So we are really trying to now support and identify what kind of actions are needed to make sure that our industries and SMEs, they are uptaking AI. And of course, in the same time, we have to all the time take good care of the education and talented people. So the idea of these supercomputers, which we are calling AI factories, is to bring together computing capacity, very talented people, startups, researchers, and traditional industry and data, what is needed. So I think we have many strengths, and we have to, of course, build to our own strengths when we speak about technologies. But we shouldn't forget that we have very, very strong industrial base in the European Union. We have very strong research base, and now we have to bring this together.
Thank you. And we are just running with some injury time. I'm looking at your chef de cabinet, Antti, that Antti will show me a sign that we will have to cut. We have 2 more questions to go. So Kati Pohjanpalo, please.
Kati Pohjanpalo, Bloomberg News. I want to pick up on the question on Germany. Europe has waited about 6 months for there to be a government that is powerful in Germany. What is the risk that Europe is placing such high hopes on Chancellor Merz that he cannot meet them, given his weakness at home? Thank you.
Yes, I think it's a challenge for all the decision makers and politicians that how we can meet all the expectations which are based on us. But of course, this is very much nowadays always the situation where we have elections in different member states that the political atmosphere is more fragmented, and often the governmental negotiations, they are not easy because often many different political parties has to be included to these negotiations, and it can take time, as we know. But this is the new political reality, and of course it's very promising that now in Germany there is also government, and they have had a very, very, I think, active start, and they have very also ambitious program. And of course, for the European Union, it's very important always that we have very strong Germany, which is our biggest member state in the European Union.
Thank you. And Antti Palola, please. Antti.
My name is Antti Palola. I'm the chairman of STTK, the Confederation of Professionals in Finland. My question refers to data centers. As we all know, China-based social media company TikTok is planning to build a data center in Finland, in Kouvola, if I have understood well. I have a brief and simple question. What is your opinion of that, and what is your advice to the Finnish decision makers how to handle this very, I would say, sensitive issue? Thank you.
From tech to politics,
Yes.
please.
Yes, and of course this is very important also discussion in the current geopolitical situation. We know that in the European Union we have certain rules when it comes to digital environment, and I think we have very good and robust rules in the European Union because we want to make sure that we have a safe and fair and democratic environment when it comes to digital world. And for example, everything what is illegal in our societies, it's also illegal online. So it's a very, very clear, same rules online and offline in the European Union. And we have seen that during the last months, often some American stakeholders, they have been criticizing that the European rules are somehow targeting American companies. But I want to underline that we have same rules for everybody. So Europe is very open for businesses, as we know, and everybody who is operating in the European Union has to respect our rules. So European companies, USA companies, Asian companies, everybody is having the same rules. So, and this is also coming to TikTok, who is operating in the European Union and who is doing business, so they have to respect, of course, our rules and regulation. Then when it comes to ICT infrastructure, when we speak about data centers, of course, we have to also look there often the security matters. And we are going to look this now more broadly during the autumn when we will prepare our Cyber Act. We will review our Cyber Security Act. Now, for example, when it comes to 5G, we have recommendation and toolbox for the member states that when it comes to critical parts of 5G networks, they should make sure that only trusted vendors are used there. And this is not the case. So in the European Union, more than 50% of our communication, 5G communication, is going via high-risk vendors currently. And now when we are reviewing our Cybersecurity Act, we will look more broadly also the IC infrastructure part, that which parts of our ICT infrastructure should be defined as a critical part. And same comes to our transport networks. So we are currently also working on that, but I'm sure that Finnish decision makers and authorities, they are now looking, of course, all the perspective. Also on these investments, I'm aware I just met the CEO of TikTok in this week, and he also said that they are planning to invest more to European Union. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Henna, for your insightful keynote speech and for very open and concrete responses in the Q&A session, and also for underlining the importance of European self-confidence, because we have all the reasons for that if we are united. Thank you so much, and let's give a big hand to Henna.
Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now it's the turn of our governor, Olli Rehn, to deliver a speech. Please, Olli.
Toimiiko se vai? Joo, hyvä. Kiitti. Thank you, Elisa. Dear Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of Bruegel and Bank of Finland, it is indeed a great privilege and pleasure to celebrate with you all both the 20th anniversary of Bruegel and the 30th anniversary of Finnish membership in the European Union. And it's indeed an honor to organize and hold this conference together with Bruegel and celebrate Europe Day. I have to say that the founders of Bruegel were truly visionary 20 years ago. They recognized a gap, a growing need for stronger economics-based, evidence-based analysis and research on the shaping of the future shaping of the European Union. And anchoring the think tank firmly with EU member states, as was done, was also a wise decision. In fact, if you go back in history, the history of Bruegel, so the key decisions were made by Chancellor Gerhard Schröder and President Jacques Chirac. And one might be tempted to say that this was the best ever decision Chirac and Schröder did together. But that would be unfair because Schröder, for instance, introduced significant economic reforms in Germany, which have paved the way for Germany's economic success in the later decades. And President Chirac had an important role in, for instance, during the Iraq War for presenting the European position. I had the privilege and pleasure of being present, if not at Bruegel's creation per se, but at its institutional foundation as economic policy advisor to Finland's then Prime Minister Matti Vanhanen. The Finnish government, specifically the Ministry of Finance, decided to become a founding member institution at the time. And as Anne Brunila is here among us, I want to particularly underline the importance of, paramount importance of Anne, because I remember many discussions at the time. You were then director at the Ministry of Finance, and your role was instrumental that the minister was persuaded and we got the thing going. And then the dynamic duo of Matti Vanhanen and Antti Kalliomäki decided to go further on this issue. A very important decision. And more recently, the Bank of Finland also joined the club as an institutional member, and we have made good use of Bruegel's valuable work. It may be that some role was played by the fact that my predecessor, Right Honourable Erkki Liikanen, is the chairman of the board of Bruegel. You gave a hint on that. Although I have to say that we are also, at the board of the Bank of Finland, we are also capable of independent thinking ourselves. So it was a good joint work in this regard. And today we all appreciate Bruegel for its diverse and independent research, which substantially enhances evidence-based and research-informed policymaking in Europe. So let me extend my warmest congratulations and wish you many more dynamic and productive years as Europe's leading policy think tank. And I also want to congratulate my dear friend Jeromin, Director Jeromin Zettelmeyer, for his recent reappointment, which by coincidence occurred on the very same day as Chancellor Merz was confirmed as Chancellor of the German Federal Republic. Although I have to say that your reappointment was a little bit less complicated and required only one round of vote instead of the 2 rounds. So congrats for that. So dear friends, Europe Day marks the 75th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, which laid out the foundation for European integration. In 1950, at that time, Europe was still recovering from human and economic devastation of the Second World War. From the Finnish standpoint, the immediate post-war years were, let's say, not a brilliant time to be a small nation. It was a very tough time in this geopolitical corner of the world and Europe. And this may be news for non-Finns, but you deserve to hear it. As Private Rahikainen put it in Väinö Linna's classic The Unknown Soldier, in response to a Finnish minister's idealistic speech after the rough armistice in September 1944 in this novel. I quote, Rahikainen said as follows, "To hell with their damned speeches, when your powder is all gone, it's better to keep your mouth shut than go bragging about the rights of small nations. A dog raises his hind leg on them." Unquote. That was the mood in the country after the Second World War, which ended in 1945, but for Finnish-Soviet War in September 1944. The Schuman Declaration turned the tide and became the starting point for Pax Europea, the long period of relative peace with notably few conflicts between European countries. And Finland started to climb from its rock bottom towards higher hills, approaching, aligning with first EFTA, then the EEC, and finally the European Union or then European Community, European Union in 1995. And indeed, an essential manifestation of Europe as a peace project is the EU's 2012 Nobel Peace Prize. The European Union had by then, for over 6 decades, contributed to the advancement of peace and reconciliation, democracy and human rights in Europe. This is how the Nobel Committee put it. I'd like to structure my remarks today under three themes. First, the seismic geopolitical shift. Second, the need for immediate investments in common defense. And third, revitalizing the EU economy through advancements in innovation, trade, productivity, and human capital. I will actually leave the third part with somewhat less emphasis because I was listening carefully to Henna's speech, and we seem to agree very much on the road forward, and we fully support the Commission's invaluable work in this regard. Let me start with the shifting geopolitical landscape, not going through all these issues, but the essence is that the rules-based international order on which Europe built its post-war recovery is currently under heavy strain. Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and also Donald Trump have each, in their own way, challenged this order, pushing for a world where great powers claim their spheres of influence and where might is the only right. Such a, they call it multipolar, I would call it tripolar world, would not be a world of peace and prosperity. Since the Second World War, for good reason, we have trusted that it is in the enlightened self-interest of the United States to stand as the security backstop for the Euro-Atlantic community. To my mind, as a long-term student of US foreign and security policy, this enlightened self-interest has clearly been rational from the standpoint of the United States' own national security and its global strategic interests and influence. However, the US is now making decisions based on a very different type of rationality that involves strained relations with the European Union. And the wording very different type of rationality is perhaps the understatement of the week, if not the year. I'm aware that some are holding out hope that this will be just temporary, that we will be back to the old normal in a few years. Well, 2 points on that. First, I would not bet on that. There is no guarantee of a policy U-turn in the US as we may be witnessing a deeper political current, whether we like it or not. And second, even more fundamentally, we must ask, can European security over the medium to long term be left at the mercy of the political winds in Pennsylvania's Rust Belt and 7 swing states? Or should Europe finally take substantially greater responsibility for its own security? In my view, the answer is clear, given the current and probable future defense environment, security environment. Europe needs to build its own credible common defense. Supporting Ukraine, reinforcing European common defense is indeed imperative for the security of the whole of Europe. It is a crucial European public good. And we need a strong, independent Europe capable of defending itself as the European pillar of NATO. Many EU countries have already increased defense spending. Germany has committed to major investments. Not all EU member states currently have the fiscal capacity to follow suit, and that's why Europe must build joint capabilities, interoperable forces, and, if necessary, also common financing. We need both national and European solutions to achieve our goal. And Europe would also benefit from a broad and liquid, deep and liquid market for safe assets like the US enjoys with its exorbitant privilege. Bonds issued by EU institutions have consistently drawn strong investor demand, and the currently rather unpredictable nature of US economic policy only increases the demand for stable investment options. Therefore, Europe should capitalize on that by developing genuine safe assets. That's another field of work calling for Bruegel's continued active input. We recall the previous contribution in that regard, the red bond, blue bond proposal some 10 years ago, over 10 years ago during the Eurozone debt crisis. Moreover, I've been reading with great interest about the proposal for a European defense mechanism, which was launched, the proposal was launched by Bruegel last month. Such an organization would apparently be modeled on the existing and well-tested template of the European Stability Mechanism, which was created around 15 years ago. I see many merits in this proposal and actually would love to dive deeper into this now, but I shall refrain from doing so because I suppose that the panel will shortly be discussing the EDM proposal more closely. Let me nevertheless comment that Bruegel's proposal includes cooperation with security cooperation with the United Kingdom, which shares our values and has a strong military, relatively strong military. Despite no longer being part of the EU, as we know, the UK remains a key partner in European security architecture. And I should also add that we cannot afford to be held back by foot-dragging or even hostile member states like Hungary, which might wish to hinder progress towards this urgent objective. And this is why we must, as Bruegel has done, search for creative solutions, typically driven by coalitions of the capable and willing to ensure that we move forward with our shared goals. I would add it's not only the UK, but also countries like Norway and maybe even Switzerland who would be natural partners in this kind of coalition of capable and willing. At the same time, we must work for more effective European institutional arrangements that better serve the common good. This should include a significantly larger EU budget, as, for instance, Vesa Vihriälä has recently suggested in his important work, and also more streamlined decision-making structures. And this is also an opportunity to make Europe economically and financially stronger, because we need a liquid and large market of safe assets, as I referred to earlier. You can ask, could European defence bonds provide such safe assets? In my view, a precondition for this would be that these bonds would be used to finance genuine European public goods, common European projects, and be backed by larger common revenues in the future. Solidarity and unity within the European Union are reinforced by standing together, demonstrating our commitment to collective security and prosperity. And let's also recall that the Treaty on European Union offers the legal basis for common defence in its Article 42. Involvement from us all EU member states is vital in maintaining a united front at a critical moment of European history and ensuring a peaceful and prosperous Europe for future generations. My third and final theme, a more mundane one, but nevertheless critical one, is the re-emerging European economy. And you may smile on this. I have often in international meetings after the emerging economies, small economies like China and India have intervened, I say that I'm speaking now as a re-emerging economy from Finland. Yes, it is, the European economy is re-emerging, even though it provides a mixed picture today. Here we have the most recent economic forecast of the Eurosystem, of the ECB, and it shows signs of recovery in the euro area, but the outlook is clouded by the pervasive uncertainty due to President Trump's trade war. On the other hand, we still have many strengths. Employment is solid at almost historical low, around 6%. Private consumption has benefited from stronger real incomes thanks to interest rate cuts, and investments in Europe's common defence and infrastructure will bolster manufacturing further and strengthen long-term growth. So Europe will continue to build up resilience against global shocks. Concerning monetary policy, which is the core business of this House, with disinflation on track and the growth outlook weakening, we decided at the ECB Governing Council meeting last month on the 17th of April to further lower interest rates, which was the 7th reduction of policy rates since last summer. Given this exceptional uncertainty, the Governing Council is maintaining full freedom of action in monetary policy. So no rate forward guidance these days, rather full freedom of action and data dependency, which means we will adjust our rates to bring inflation, stabilize inflation to 2% in the medium term, just as our strategy tells us to do. The elevated uncertainty brings me to the significant risks to our economic outlook, especially trade protectionism. An extensive trade war would weaken economic output worldwide, and we have also already seen major turbulence in the global stock markets in recent weeks and months. Here we have calculations by the Bank of Finland, although I have to say that it's difficult to update this on a daily basis because, as you may have noted, things change. There are twists and turns on a daily basis at the White House in the Oval Office. But in fact, I deliberately wanted to show this to you because this, which dates from several weeks back, is actually fairly close to the, say, current assumptions where the trade war might be heading. And I explain a little bit these calculations which have been done by our economists using our econometric model AINO indicate that the US, if the US were to impose tariffs targeting all imports from EU countries and China, raising them by 25 percentage points, and the EU were to take equivalent countermeasures, world GDP could decline by over 0.5% in both this year and next. The impact on the euro area economy could be slightly greater, with the estimated GDP effect ranging from 0.7 to 1.5% in the first year, depending on the increased uncertainty, which is a critical factor here because uncertainty is really poison to consumer confidence and investor confidence, and depending, of course, on the extent of countermeasures finally taken by the EU and China. With all the usual caveats of uncertainty related to calculations, these figures illustrate the seriousness of the threat posed by a full-scale trade war. And I can add that our calculations concerning the effects of the trade war on the Finnish economy are broadly in line with these estimated effects on the euro area economy, which is no surprise because Finland is a microcosm of the euro area. While the model estimations come with uncertainty, they consistently speak to significantly negative outcomes for small open economies such as Finland as a result of trade war. And this word small open economy in the economics literature refers actually to everybody else but the United States of America. And the European Union is composed of 27 small member states, small open economies, with one difference. There are some countries who have already realized it and some others who have not yet realized this fact, that they are small nations in the global world. In my view, in the face of US protectionism, the Commission's response has been wise and rational. The Commission has rightly suggested a zero for zero tariff agreement, kind of new concept of net zero between the EU and the US. While Europe remains committed to constructive negotiations with the US, the Commission has been preparing proportionate countermeasures to reinforce our negotiating position with the aim of reaching a solution that benefits everybody and avoids further damage to economic development. And here we have, in fact, the EU free trade agreements indicated, and this is something that I wanted to show to you because this often is getting forgotten, that we are not only talking about, or we should not only be talking about EU-US trade relations, no matter how important they are, because in reality the European Union has, since around 20 years, I remember the times when the WTO multilateral route was basically blocked, and we concluded with then Trade Commissioner Peter Mandelson, who is now the UK ambassador in Washington, D.C., that because the first best is blocked multilateral route, we have to make a strategic decision to negotiate bilateral and regional free trade agreements. And yes, we have done so, we meaning Europe, the European Union, which has the competences in the field of common trade policy. So we have 45 agreements in place with 76 countries, covering half of EU foreign trade, and more is being negotiated. Well, in these days, the slogan, "This is Europe's moment," has become the slogan of the current era. But to what extent is there substance to it? No doubt President Trump's policies are compromising the US economic and institutional dominance, while Europe's position is benefiting from its stability and democratic institutions, stability of democratic institutions and the rule of law. Yet the fact remains that the size of the US economy bypasses the European economy substantially in many dimensions, especially concerning factor productivity and therefore in growth. So that's why I would reiterate what Henna said about the importance of pursuing the policies of industrial competitiveness, productivity, cutting the red tape, investing in cutting-edge research and innovation, AI. That is indeed critical for Europe's economic future. And from the standpoint of central banking and financial integration, I want to underline the importance of the savings and investment union, which should help to channel Europeans' formidable savings into productive investments in Europe. The US has a larger and more unified internal capital market, which benefits from scaling, a strong venture capital ecosystem, and fewer regulatory hurdles. And this is a further reason why we have to proceed as regards this objective. The US dollar may remain the world's leading reserve currency at the center of the global financial system, but many investors are keen to diversify their portfolios to euro-denominated assets, which will also strengthen the international role of the euro. I was just in Washington for the IMF spring meetings the other week and met with both policymakers and market forces there. And one important observation I want to channel to you, and this is that I was a little bit skeptical about the hype of capital flows moving from the United States to Europe. But when I talked with several market forces, several investors, there is actually more truth to it than I expected as a realist. And it seems that so far it's been largely the hedge funds, also for technical reasons, that have rebalanced their portfolios. And now the question is whether the institutional investors, say the Japanese insurances or Dutch pension fund, Canadian pension funds, Nordic pension funds will follow suit, not kind of with a complete reposition of the portfolio, but if you reposition from if you don't count the rest of the world, you reposition from 80 to 20 US dollar, euro to 70-30. That already has a quite significant combined aggregate impact. Let's see, but that's something that we also have to keep in mind and try to facilitate because that is very much in the interest of Europe. Before concluding, I want to say one thing which is important in the field of competitiveness and economic development, which we should not forget, and that is human capital. Human capital and academic freedom. This, by the way, related to AI, artificial intelligence, because while we may not be the leading producer of AI, we can become a leading applier of AI in Europe, and it provides formidable catching up potential from the European economic and social standpoint. And here, human capital and academic freedom are among Europe's greatest assets. As these freedoms are now being eroded in the United States, let's be honest about that, Europe has a unique opportunity. In my view, the European Union should rapidly create a special visa program for top researchers seeking intellectual freedom without political pressure. We must highlight Europe's universities where critical thinking is encouraged and academic liberty protected. This would be a major investment in Europe's future prosperity and influence. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, to conclude, today's world is experiencing yet another major transition, like it was about 30 years ago when the Cold War came to an end and the division of Europe ended. But now, unfortunately, history is moving in reverse gear. Europe's external security and our soft power depend now on reinforcing its hard power, especially in terms of coordinated defense solutions. Moreover, despite the current uncertain geopolitical environment, international cooperation remains essential in a highly interconnected world. We as Europeans, we stand for it and we continue to pursue this objective. At the same time, Europe must strengthen its economic foundation by finding ways to increase productivity and hence fulfill its true economic and social potential. At the European Central Bank, we will contribute to this by ensuring price stability and financial stability, and thus laying the foundation for Europe's economic and social re-emergence and long-term resilience. In sum, this truly is Europe's moment. We must defend our way of life, solving conflict and making progress through reason, dialogue and democracy. As my favorite thinker, Reinhold Niebuhr, the theologian and international relations theorist from our Western neighbor across the Atlantic, once said, the sad duty of politics is to establish justice in a sinful world. That is precisely Europe's task now, more so than in decades. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Governor Rehn. And I wish to extend yet another big thank you for Vice President Henna Virkkunen for spending this morning with us. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Q&A. Erkki, please.
Thank you very much, Governor.
Just a second, Erkki.
Thank you very much, Governor. lot of substance in your speech, and it reminds me of many great memories in this room. 8 years ago, a governor spoke from the same podium. It's also great slides, but one slide was full of ice hockey players. There were Wayne Gretzky, Jari Kurri, Risto Siltanen, and Esa Tikkanen. His name was Mark Carney. When I followed Mark Carney in recent days, there's other challenges which you actually referred to. There are many questions in everybody's mind, but just put one, because you were in Washington. For outsiders, the key questions have been, in the future, financial stability, independence of Fed, but I go there. But what is their commitment to international financial system, like IMF and World Bank? When I read the Scott Bessent, I got some replies, but I would like to hear what is your assessment, US commitment to international financial institutions?
Thank you, Eric, for the great question. And first of all, I have to say that as we had the retreat of the ECB Governing Council in Porto this week, from Tuesday till yesterday, at one point we took a picture together showing thumbs up to Mark Carney, sending it to Mark Carney after his great meeting with President Trump, where he defended the owners of Canada, so that Canada is not for sale. Excellent speaking points he had in the White House. It's a very important question indeed, and my take is that Scott Bessent apparently wanted to calm down the concerns about the US commitment to at least the finance sector, international institutions, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank Group at large. And then he continued by saying that it's important that from the US standpoint that the IMF focuses on its core business, which is global financial stability. I have to say that for the ears of a representative of the Nordic-Baltic constituency at the IMF, that sounded very familiar, because that has been our message as well. And in that sense, it was, if not reassuring, but at least calming down that this message was a rational and reasonable one. Concerning otherwise discussions at the corridors and various fringe meetings at DC, I didn't notice, say, particular positive activism from the US side, but nevertheless continued participation, and we saw no signs of, say, taking distance from the IMF and the World Bank, which as such, in my view, is reassuring, and also it is in line with the enlightened self-interest of the United States. If I may say, as a former DFL activist in Minnesota during my student times. DFL stands for, for those who are uninitiated, so the Democratic Party is called the Democratic Party in 49 states of the United States of America, but in Minnesota it's the people are called DFLers and the party is called DFL, which means the Democratic Farmer Labor Party of Minnesota. That's Tim Walz's party. I was not extensively getting involved in US domestic politics, just distributing some leaflets some years back, some decades back.
Thanks. And then next question here, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Esa Hyvärinen. I come from an energy company called Fortum. Thank you very much, Olli, for sharing those wise words with us. And as we all know, forecasting is difficult, especially when it comes to the future, but I would nevertheless like you to do that a little bit and share your vision of the EU 2030. You underlined heavily the need for common defense, the economic issues that the EU will have to sort out. Would it be possible, without mentioning the F word, more federal decision making?
Thank you, Esa, for this very critical question. And if you think of federal way of taking decisions, you have one very clear example of that in the European Union. That is called the Eurosystem and the European Central Bank. And of course, I may be a bit biased and not fully objective, but in my view, the decision-making at the ECB functions quite well, and we've succeeded also at the different cycles to stabilize inflation to 2%, including in the most recent cycle, without huge economic and social and human costs, which might have been the case in the worst case. I'm personally, if I may say, I'm maybe the last functionalist in Europe. I believe in the philosophy form follows function, but that's let's say a relative of federalism in the thinking about European integration. In my view, it's important to find pragmatic, functional solutions. And for instance, in the field of defense, common defense, which will be discussed soon in the panel, maybe after a bio break. So just a hint to the moderator. So in that field, we have to be creative and pragmatic, and we have to find various, in my view, parallel solutions. So you need national solutions. You need the SAFE instrument proposed by the European Commission, which is a community instrument based on EU financing and EU lending, EU funding. And then you need also coalitions of the capable and willing, which may be intergovernmental by nature, but they can be made to work like the European Stability Mechanism. So that's basically how I see it. And by the way, one important field which I didn't discuss here because Henna was referring to it is energy and climate, and because that's your field as and Fortum's field. We've done our calculations recently, talking about 2030, and for the moment, Europe is still suffering from the energy crisis caused by Putin's brutal war in Ukraine. Even though we survived, we adjusted, but the price of energy is still higher in Europe compared to the US, and that is one obstacle of European industrial competitiveness. And therefore, I see that to continue on the road of green transition and renewable energy solutions is indeed essential, because we have to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels even further, because it is also a matter of European competitiveness, and it is also a geopolitical investment. So I think we are now in a transitional period where we are still suffering from these higher energy costs, but at some point this green transition will pay off and will improve our standing.
We take one more question before the break. Kati, please.
Kati Pohjanpalo, Bloomberg News. The markets expect a rate cut in June and potentially one or two more after that. Does that sound reasonable to you? Thank you.
No small talk, Kati. Thank you. As you may have noted, I've been focusing this week on longer-term issues, preparing my keynote or my remarks today, and focusing on the longer-term monetary policy strategy of the European Central Bank at our Porto retreat. If you look at, I can actually show this to you. By the way, that's our slogan, and I think it goes in line with Bruegel's evidence-based research thinking, securing stability in science we trust. So we have we take this one here. So this is March forecast, And we then said in the March monetary policy statement and reiterated it in our April MPS, we said that many of the risks we identified, geopolitical tensions and trade protectionism, the risks we identified in our March forecast have largely materialized or are being materialized. And this is still the case. At the same time, there are several issues in the field of inflation outlook which in fact imply a downward trend in short-term trend in inflation, such as the appreciation of the euro, the reduced energy, oil and gas prices, and also the impact of the trade war, because its main impact in Europe is more subdued growth and thus more subdued inflationary pressures. So against this background of disinflation on track and growth having weakened, in case this is going to be confirmed in our June forecast, then in my view, in order to achieve our 2% symmetric inflation target over the medium term, the right reaction in monetary policy is to cut rates. But we are data dependent and we take decisions at each meeting. So I don't say anything more at this stage, because I want to see the data and the broad macroeconomic projection exercise of June 1st before taking any decisions. Going beyond that, we practice data dependency and a meeting-by-meeting approach. Sorry for the uninitiated, but I had to be precise because I know Kati will report that to the Bloomberg wires. So.
Thank you very much, Olli, for this excellent speech, and thank you for the audience for good Q&A as well. Let's thank Olli first, and then we'll go for a break of 8 minutes while we set up the panel. So please be back here at 10:35. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the panel discussion. Okay, dear friends, I trust you, Jeromin Zettelmeyer, Director of Bruegel, to introduce the great panel today. Thank you.
This is working? Yes, wonderful. So I will introduce the great panel, but before I do that, I want to primarily thank our hosts, the Bank of Finland, and particularly Governor Rehn, who has been a friend. Actually, before I joined Bruegel, I hope he will not become less of a friend because of my activities at Bruegel. But it was a wonderful speech you gave this morning. We again discovered new things about you, which is kind of hard because I thought I knew you pretty well. Your DFL activism, for example, which, you know, today you may have narrowly avoided deportation if you had behaved like that. And of course, I very much agree with the answer to one of the questions, what you described as your functional philosophy. So we can both be loyal to the EU and believe in that type of deeper integration, and we can be flexible when it turns out, for example, that the optimal defense club in Europe does not exactly coincide with the EU. We have to be flexible then. We would be stupid not to be flexible. I'm of course also, you know, very greatly honored to be speaking today here on the 30th anniversary of Finnish membership of the European Union, on the 75th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, which began this phase of the great European project. But as a German, I also want to acknowledge that we are speaking one day after the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, the German defeat, which ushered in a new dawn for Europe, which was successful beyond imagination at that time. And it also ushered in an era of multilateralism and growth in international trade and development and global convergence of living standards, which was also successful beyond imagination, with the United Nations founded only about 6 months later, in October of 1945 at the San Francisco conference. And so the panel is about all that. It's about our worry that we might be at an end of an era on all these counts. On peace, unprecedented 80 years of peace, with the notable exception of the Western Balkans and now the war in Ukraine. In Europe, of prosperity, of good global governance, of multilateralism. And, you know, let's face it, we have so much to lose, and we still have a lot to go. I mean, we still have poverty. We still have huge differences in living standards, even within Europe. So it is too early to let this fantastic experiment go. And so to discuss how, in a sense, we protect and develop the experiment, we have this wonderful panel here, and so let me very quickly introduce them. So you know, every Finn who reads the news knows Kristi Raik. She's the director of the International Center for Defense and Security based in Tallinn, but she's also an adjunct professor of international relationships at the University of Turku and well known here. We have Heather Grabbe, who is a senior fellow at Bruegel and straddles economics and politics in her own work. We have Iikka Korhonen, the director of BOFIT, which I always thought, and that shows how old I am, was the Bank of Finland Institute for Economies in Transition, but apparently it's not. It's the Bank of Finland. It used to be for emerging economies, so it's broader. But you know, he's here because he is a leading thinker on emerging economies, but particularly, of course, because BOFIT is one of the leading centers in Europe on China and Russia. And finally, last not least, we have Leena Mörttinen, the Permanent Undersecretary for International and Financial Market Affairs of the Ministry of Finance, and someone who it is really, really fun to argue with. Okay, so we will proceed as follows. We will give each speaker about 5 minutes to make some introductory remarks. They will cover very different angles. As you will see, we will have a more or less spontaneous round of follow-up, which I will try to make up as they go, and we will turn to the floor. We are a little bit late at this point, but we will go, I would say, probably for about an hour and 5 to 10 minutes. So the hard deadline is lunch at noon. We had a bit of a buffer. There will not be any lengthy speeches after this. And you are all invited for the lunch. And by the way, there will not be speeches at the lunch either, so you can rest assured. So, Kristi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jeromin, and thank you to the Bank of Finland and to Bruegel for the opportunity to join the discussion. And happy Europe Day to everyone. Indeed, we have a lot to celebrate, but we also have a lot to lose in Europe. My field is European foreign and security policy and defense. And when I started working on it more than 20 years ago, of course, the security environment was completely different, exceptionally benign for Europe. There was no direct military threat to any EU member state. Russia was relatively weak and was trying to democratize. The US still continued to provide security guarantees to Europe. And then the EU was aspiring to be a different kind of international actor. We had all these discussions about normative power Europe, civilian power Europe, and geopolitical competition seemed to be a thing of the past. And of course, European integration itself is a prime example of how it is possible to put behind realist geopolitics, where it is ultimately force that determines relations between states. But I'm afraid we have reached the limits of how far this model of European integration can be extended beyond the member states of today and possibly some candidate countries that will join in future. Normative power, I would say, still is very much relevant. We have heard it also today, how Europe still aspires to be able to shape global rules and norms. There are many like-minded countries out there, but there are the three major powers, China, Russia, and now also the US, who don't share our view of the liberal rules-based order, who are trying to remake it in different ways. And yet many countries in the world don't want to become part of any sphere of influence in any of these three powers. So geopolitical rivalry has come back with a vengeance, and especially in Europe, where we have major war again on the European continent. And Russia's war against Ukraine is something that forced the EU to become more of a geopolitical actor. And it's not enough anymore for Europe to be a normative power, but it also has to become a normal power in the sense of having sufficient military force in order to be able to defend itself and take care of its own security. What we saw after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 was many big steps on the EU side that made the EU a more serious geopolitical actor. It took the side of Ukraine very clearly in a violent geopolitical conflict between two neighboring countries, one of them being a major power. Secondly, it provided extensive assistance to Ukraine, also including military assistance. Thirdly, it was in that situation that the EU offered membership perspective to Ukraine, to a country at war. Fourth, the EU took a stance on the future of the EU's borders in a situation where these borders were being violently contested. So Ukraine is a candidate country, but it is at war with its borders being violently contested. And the EU has firmly taken a stance for territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine in this situation. And then we have seen the process of strengthening of European defense during the past few years. But it took another and even bigger shock for many Europeans before I think Europe is really getting serious about its defense capability. And this bigger shock is Trump 2. This has created this precarious situation in Europe where Russia is still a long-term threat to European security. Its aspirations go beyond Ukraine. It wants to redefine the European security order, restore its sphere of influence. That has not changed. But now we are in a situation where European security depends on the United States, still to a considerable degree, but we can no longer be certain whether we can rely on the security guarantees provided by the US. And we know, of course, that no matter who is in power in the US wants to reduce its commitments to European security. So now really is time for Europe to act. We see Germany has taken really significant decisions that kind of promise to make a big difference for Europe's ability to defend itself. We have all these discussions in many other European countries, and the Nordic Baltic countries and Poland, I think, are really leading the way and showing how it is possible to rapidly increase defense spending when there is really urgent political necessity to do so. It's not that our countries in our region wouldn't have our problems with social welfare and our difficult political challenges to rapidly increase defense spending in a situation where then we would need to spend on health and education and then many other issues. But we can't really afford to neglect our security, because then the fundament of our welfare would also erode. Now Europe is trying to gradually, I think, take over the responsibility that the US has had for European defense. This is the only way forward, but it is a long process. Different expert estimates refer to 5 to 10 years before we can seriously say that Europe achieves the level where it has taken over some significant US capabilities, and even then there are certain aspects where still we would need to rely on the US. We have the urgent task of Europe, where Europe has to take over the US military assistance to Ukraine, which possibly will not be continued. And it is possible for Europe, but again, it requires some very tough decisions. And again, it is not 100%. We will still need to secure some form of US backing. And we have had very difficult discussions in Europe about security guarantees that can be provided to Ukraine after the war. And these discussions have also exposed kind of the dependency on the US, at least in some form of backup role. But we know that without credible security guarantees to Ukraine, there will be no sustainable peace. Also, there will be no EU membership for Ukraine. There will be no stability in Europe. Now, a couple of words also about the EU and NATO, the institutional frameworks for European defense. NATO remains the only framework where we have command and control structures needed for collective defense. We have collective defense plans, which for the first time after the end of the Cold War now are really seriously aimed at defending every inch of NATO territory. As the slogan goes, the implementation of these plans is work in progress, Of course, these plans are made with the assumption that the US is still there with us. And even the implementation of the current NATO defense plans with the US on board requires Europeans to increase defense spending to 3.5% of their GDP. And then if we think of the possibility of the US withdrawing, hopefully gradually and not suddenly and dramatically, it means, of course, that the demand on Europeans will be even higher. But I think in the next years, what is necessary is to work with strengthening the European pillar of NATO, build on the existing NATO defense plans, but Europeans really need to look through where they are able to take over US commitments, and Bruegel has also done some very interesting work in this respect, but then also identifying areas where the US will still be needed for Europe to have credible defense and deterrence. And then the EU plays a very, very important complementary role in this, in strengthening the European defense industry, also providing the funding opportunities and pushing Europeans to cooperate more. Because when we get to this process of Europeans developing capabilities where we have had this long time reliance on the US, this will need to be done in cooperation by different European countries. There will have to be multinational projects. There will be big issues with interoperability and fragmentation to be addressed. And we will need then the EU's help in this process. So to conclude my remarks, indeed, we have a lot to lose, but we don't have any time to lose. We need to act very fast, and I think it's pointless to discuss whether Russia might be ready to invade a NATO country in 5 or 10 years. The effort that Europe is facing is just so big, and it will take many years in any case before Europe is able, without the US, to actually take responsibility for its defense. So we still need this normative and structural foreign policy and working with like-minded countries, but we also have to be realistic that Europe's ability in the current global environment to shape the global security environment is limited. And for Europe to survive in this world of geopolitical rivalry, there is just no alternative, but its normative power needs to be backed with a much stronger military power.
Thank you so much, Kristi. Heather, please.
Well, thank you very much. Great to see you all this morning here in Helsinki. So Olli Rehn already referred this morning to Mark Carney's wisdom in ice hockey diplomacy. And I'd like to remind you of a speech that he made 10 years ago when he was governor of the Bank of England, which was all about the tragedy of the horizon. And by that, he referred to the way that we as human beings, just psychologically, as well as policymakers and business people and politicians, we tend to focus on what's directly in front of our noses and not think about the longer term. And what is just over the horizon of the next election or the business cycle or the immediate priorities gets forgotten. And I think the big danger that we have at the moment in thinking about resilience and shocks is that we will be focusing on Trump's daily political drama and the very real risks that Putin poses, as Kristi was just saying. We need to address these, we need to deal with these, but we must not continue to forget what is just over the horizon of the next election or the next annual results of a business. And the shocks that are coming to us, whether we like it or not, the shocks that cannot be negotiated away or changed are going to come from climate and nature degradation. Now, the Bank of Finland has been a very active a member of the network for greening of the financial system, and in fact, in Finland, I think there's been a lot of long-term planning for the impact of these shocks on the Finnish economy. But that is unfortunately not the case for many other economies, particularly the small open economies that constitute the European Union. And there's a real danger now that the trade-off that we face in terms of financing, and it's really going to be made between short and long-term risks, that we will focus primarily on the short term and forget about what's just over the horizon. And the problem we have is that the climate and environment risks are going to interact with other shocks because they will bring about effects on geopolitics. For example, look at the contest for access to raw materials and to minerals. No coincidence that Trump is now trying to squeeze Ukraine on minerals, but also because the looming rice crisis, for example, in Asia will make some authoritarian leaders more aggressive. The crisis that Russia is facing for its energy infrastructure because of melting permafrost will also have an impact on how not only this Russian president, but also future ones behave. So we need to think about the interaction of these risks and the cascading effects that they will have. How can we manage these kinds of risks? Well, traditionally, we've used two principal measures. One is planning, in policy terms, and the other one is insurance. Now, with planning, we're in a tricky situation because many of these risks need to be managed at multiple levels. As you will all be very aware, former President Sauli Niinistö did a very important report last year on the vulnerability and the need to build resilience in the European economy, particularly in terms of civilian infrastructure. And that needs to be built at several different levels. At EU level, particularly preventing risk of sabotage in a much better planned way, but also at regional and at local levels. And he emphasized the need to join these up in a much better way. But we still don't have a comprehensive risk assessment for how climate shocks will affect the European economy. There are very different estimates of the size of the shocks and exactly where they will come from. And some of them will be internal and some will be external. And I think one of the big problems that we have is that insurance, which has been the way of managing risks, particularly on the business side, may not be available. So Munich Re has been warning recently that climate change could, as they call it, crash the global insurance sector. They estimate that the global losses of climate-induced wildfires and other events last year was $320 billion. And they've made it very clear that reinsurance alone cannot absorb systemic risks brought by climate change. And they've argued for governments to create chief risk officers. The Allianz board has warned recently that heat and water destroy capital, and they make many risks uninsurable. And of course, without insurance, many other financial services become unviable, from mortgages to investments. So also in the private sector, we need to be thinking about the interaction between risk management in the private and the public sectors, and where at the different levels to do it. Now, this is both about climate risks, but it's also, of course, about the loss of nature. The European Central Bank has warned that 75% of euro area loans are to companies that are highly dependent on one or more ecosystem services. Put in the terms of an example, essentially widespread water stress could cause a large number of European businesses to go bust, with potential systemic implications for the financial sector. This is about extreme weather events, but it's also chronic water stress, desertification around the Mediterranean, for example. But in addition to the shocks that we might be expecting on the European continent, there are also the shocks that can come from climate impacts in the rest of the world. We learned a very difficult lesson in 2022 about the risks of fossil fuel shocks, but these are not the only commodities that could bring us supply shocks in the future. Many of the resources that we import, and we are a very resource-dependent continent, as Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta warned in their reports last year. Many of the resources that we import are subject to climate impacts that will bring shortages, so how do we manage shortages? But also they can ultimately bring absolute scarcity, which means we need to think about, in our economic security approaches, about substitutability, not just diversification, which is geographic substitutability, but also technological substitutability, because some of the raw materials, but also intermediate goods that we import are at risk. Enrico Letta very much emphasized that decoupling resource use from economic growth is the fastest way for us in Europe to mitigate the risks associated with dependence on authoritarian regimes, on fragile supply chains, and on commodity price volatility. So we need to boost our resource productivity in Europe to insulate against shocks. So in that respect, the circular economy and a much stronger focus on resource productivity are important ways of ensuring longer-term resilience. So just to finish, what are the different trade-offs that we need to think about in enhancing preparedness through comprehensive risk management? We're going to need to upgrade infrastructure across the whole EU to cope with a much wider range of temperatures and humidity levels, as well as extreme weather events, in addition to protecting that infrastructure from sabotage. So there are the man-made risks, but then there are also the natural disaster risks which intersect. I think we have three major trade-offs that we need to face in thinking about this, both for businesses and for the public sector. One is on money. So we're going to have to devote, as Kristi was pointing out now, a very large amount of money to defence. We need to build into that defence also climate resilience. There are a lot of very important interactions. As we upgrade infrastructure to make it more resilient to external attack, we should be building in also climate resilience. The second trade-off is time horizon, so the short versus long term. That also applies at the level of infrastructure upgrades. So, for example, do we invest in walls to try to keep out water or in floodplains? That's difficult for landowners to accept. Do we invest more in grey infrastructure, more concrete, or do more in green infrastructure to absorb, for example, greater rainfall and green infrastructure to bring cooling in cities? So that takes us right down into the nitty-gritty of issues like public procurement requirements for buildings which are financed with public money. They need to build in also the long-term solutions. And of course, there is a fundamental trade-off between resilience and efficiency. We need to build redundancy, excess capacity, inertia into quite a lot of our systems and our infrastructure for resilience. But that, of course, means trade-offs with efficiency. And at the moment, many of our policymaking frameworks are focused around efficiency. So we need to think about how to manage this. So I'll just finish by giving a quotation from another part of the work of Reinhold Niebuhr. I know he's a great favorite of Olli's because when I used to write speeches for Olli, I had a whole list of Reinhold Niebuhr quotations. So the one I would really like to remind you is actually a prayer, very appropriate on the day that we have a new pope. And he said, you know, Lord, give me the courage to change what I can change. Lord, give me the patience to accept what I cannot change. And Lord, give me the wisdom to know the difference between the two. So now we really have to grasp the courage to change what we can change in terms of thinking beyond the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Iikka, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, in my remarks, and we've sort of slightly coordinated beforehand, I will concentrate on economic security and economic resilience at the European level. But I would like to sort of start by stating something that's perhaps obvious, that, I mean, international trade is actually good. And bilateral trade deficits or surpluses are meaningless. They're not bad, they're not good. They are deficits that can be financed, that hopefully can be financed. And I'm saying this because I fear that the sort of discussion, even at the global level, has been hijacked by President Trump's strange obsession with the sort of bilateral trade deficits. This is very, very, very strange. Then the second point I want to emphasize is that when we are talking about security and resilience, then actually market economies are remarkably resilient. I fear sometimes we economists are too pessimistic about the ability of companies and households to actually adapt to new situations. I think this happened when the full-scale war in Ukraine started and Russia invaded and energy prices went through the roof. There were a lot of forecast about imminent catastrophe, sort of waiting for German economy, German industry. This did not materialize. What we have seen is the continuous downward trend that actually began several years before the invasion and before COVID. Companies in countries like Iran and Russia, both under heavy sanctions, have found ways to sort of adapt. I mean, those countries, those economies are not doing great. They could be doing much better. The welfare of the citizens could be higher, but they have found ways to adapt markets, to sell goods, to buy goods. In Iran, to produce drones for Russians, first to buy and then to license and build themselves. So that's, I think, something that we have to rely on and have to remember. At the same time, I don't want to say that we should have this Panglossian view of the world where at the end of the day everything will be good and we will adapt and then there will be some cost along the way. I think there are some risks that are very, very large and some risks that if they materialize, the costs will be and the pain will be very high, and some of the risks can be actually existential. So we need to deal them beforehand, and this is where the economic security comes in. And at the European level, I think there are many risks where actually sort of collective action at the European level is basically the only option. This can be EU level, and in some cases, like we have discussed, it can be EU plus EFTA and UK and some other countries. I would like to highlight one area where I think we have actually taken some steps towards collective action. I mean, there are many things to do here, but this is at least some sort of a partial success story, and I think we all need them. I mean, if you look at energy and European energy markets and the European purchases of energy products from outside the EU, we have actually come a long way since 22. So in 22, on average, every month the EU bought roughly 70 million tons of energy products from outside the EU. In 24, this was 60 million tons, so drop of 15%. The euro value of that has actually dropped by roughly 50% because the energy prices have come down. So clearly we have been able to be more efficient. We have been able to ramp up our own production, renewables, mostly renewables, but of course there's still a long way to go. I mean, we need to mitigate the risks coming from, say, energy markets. We need even more renewables. We need perhaps more nuclear, if that can be sort of provided at that sort of market, some sort of market-based. We need better connections across national borders and even within national borders, say if you look at Sweden, for example. Now, why would we need this? I think in this case, by doing all of this, we can actually advance many valuable goals. First of all, there will be less macroeconomic risks. We are less vulnerable to adverse terms of trade shocks. We can at least try to fight climate change in this way by having sort of more efficient energy mix. And I think this will be a part of EU's and Europe's long-term strategy towards Russia, sort of containment of Russia and making sure that Russia has less resources to wage wars if it so wishes. That since Russia is basically completely reliant on hydrocarbons and export of hydrocarbons, then if we can actually reduce the demand for them, I think this is a very worthwhile goal also from that point of view. And I think that's something positive I want to sort of stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Iikka. Leena, please.
Thanks, Jeromin, and happy Europe Day, everybody. I'm happy to be last because I get to enjoy everybody else's speeches, and I'll try to be short, which is really difficult for me, so sorry for that. First of all, of course, I have to say congratulations to Bruegel and particularly to Jeromin. I'm really happy that you continue at the helm. I'm looking forward to the many extremely good arguments that we're going to have, and I hope that we have a bit of that here as well, although you're a chair, so you have to be impartial in this. But it's been a real crisis, not just adding up of what we collectively are experiencing, but it's a crisis of macroeconomic analysis as well of what is happening. And we have been living in a world where we're hoping that we would live in a world of end of history, where everything would turn into liberal democracies and market economy would prevail. And now it has turned more like it's a clash of civilizations, the world we are living in, which is much more challenging, which is not multilateral, and it's sort of broken down. But I've sort of come to terms with it in thinking through this, that Finns are not optimistic. We are usually pessimistic, but we have something which is resilient fighting mode. And that's what I see myself moving into, also as an economist, but particularly looking at it from the point of view of Europe. And I have to say, over the years, I've gotten so fed up with, with our lovely US friends and colleagues asking us, who do I call when I call Europe? So we've been sort of always belittled a bit in the international tables. Our economic growth has been dismal and productivity growth has been dismal. Now there is such a thing which is bizarre. At the same time as the world is the most dangerous ever in our lifetime after the Second World War, we are also in a situation where we actually are potentially experiencing something in Europe that has never been experienced before, where Europe actually comes together. Now, what is interesting, geoeconomics that Russia did particularly well in Europe through its cheap energy, providing one price to another, another price to another, that tears countries apart. It's really difficult to agree when you are in that situation. But geopolitics and security threats draw us together. And I think we are moving quicker in Europe than we ever have before. And I think it's wonderful. Now, Europe was never a sort of a market economy exercise, particularly after Brexit happened. So Nordic countries have been a bit alone there, with some other like-minded countries as well in Europe in fighting for the model. But now, I guess, finally us, rather naive market economists have realized that this is actually not exactly a market economy, and it has never been. There are market failures. We thought that you would only interfere there, but there is a potential to build a better system by using wise policies. Now, it got me worried, by the way, before the Trump 2 administration, Biden's Inflation Reduction Act was seen very aggressively. And there was a lot of discussion that Europe should start, or particularly the large member states, saying that they would start subsidizing their own firms. And the one thing that we have to defend is the internal market and make it better. So we really have a chance to build something on this. And now that it has turned more into realizing that we really have to take care of our own security, I see great strength in that. But of course, we will also have to allow that the threat perception, while EU is now it's always been a peace project, by the way, but it's now peace through parabellum, preparing for war. But it is still not the same threat perception for all the member states, which is understandable. So we need EU to stick together and definitely strengthen its common defense. So rearm Europe is necessary. I'm happy that it's progressing fast. But in addition to that, we need more. And I think the Bruegel paper was particularly interesting in this regard, that it's just 150 billion isn't enough, and the next MFF takes a while to be here. So we need to build something and be quick about it. And I think there is resolve in Europe that encourages me to think that we may actually come on top of this, because now there's a great leveling of the playing field, also, from the US side by, their aggressive trade policies, done as a favor to us. And there are other countries all over the world that are looking for partners. So we can build partnerships, connect with others, make better internal market, and while we keep a cool head. And I guess that's the thing. Finns never admit to it, but we are a bit of an emotional people here. So we just have to maintain the coolness, the sort of fighting spirit of we can do this. and solve the issue one by one. But I do think that the security threat, while it is a huge threat, it's also an enormous opportunity for Europe to be stronger together. And I think if we do that right, this could be the moment for Europe, for sure. Thanks.
Super. So what I'm going to do now is I will ask just one round of questions to the panel. And because I don't want to, I want to ask all the really difficult questions, but I don't want to put anyone on the spot and face the embarrassment of a refusal to answer that question. So I will answer these questions collectively. And then people can pick and choose, right? And there were like 4 or 5 of questions. In the end, of course, they could all just nod and pass on to each other. So I would maybe go in the opposite order of the panel. And so I will have a few on the economic and a few on the security side, and they always will straddle this. So let me start with a question on the fiscal implications. And so, this picks up a little bit on what Leena said at the moment, that there's essentially an opportunity for further integration, but it is quite difficult to actually get concrete about how we can integrate more on which issue with what majorities, right? Which is why we're probably in this somewhat pragmatic world that we may need different institutional arrangements for different problems. But my broad question, I mean, again, to all of you, but of course particularly to Leena, is what do you see as the fiscal implications, and particularly for the balance of essentially national level and European level spending, how to organize the European level spending? Is this now the time for a bigger MFF? And, of course, a bigger MFF has to be financed out of the same pool of resources as national budgets. That's the basic problem we always have. And in addition, if anyone wants to maybe say something about whether we should be content with the fiscal rules reform that we have, which I think is quite good, plus the national escape clause application that the European Commission has offered, or whether we need something else. So this is block 1, fiscal. Okay, block 2 has to do with the type of turbulence that we have seen from the US in the last few months on the trade area. And here my question to the panel is do you expect a financial shoe to drop at some point or not? Because of course the logic underlying the aggressive trade policies in the US is this notion that the rest of the world, particularly the allies of the US, should be paying for services that have been provided for free in the US. And this logic, as you know, has also been extended to the role of the dollar as a reserve asset, US Treasury bills. And then there's the sense that the trade problems and the loss of manufacturing in the US are a result of a dollar that is too strong, which kind of reminds me a little bit as an old IMF type of this debate that we had at the IMF on capital flow measures, where the IMF decided about 10, 15 years ago to endorse certain, or at least tolerate certain capital flow measures that were designed to keep currencies from appreciating, right? That was, so there's a little bit of a similar logic there. Maybe fiddling with inflows and outflows is okay if you are in some sort of a national emergency where you're losing your manufacturing because your currency is appreciating as a result of an inflow of hot money. Now, that's not exactly what's happening in the US right now, but the arguments are rather similar. And so I'm wondering whether there's anyone who wants to sort of think ahead a little bit, or whether this is something to fear or not. The third set of questions is about China. And so, in essence, the question is, does anything that has happened in the last 6 months make you think that we should be recalibrating our China policy? And of course, I'm not for a second thinking that you are going to fall into this sort of simplistic, the enemy of my enemy is your friend, or something like that logic. So this is not what it is about. But what it is about is that maybe there are some aspects of China, which we knew were there before, that, given how the things are working, seem a little more attractive than they seemed in the past. And particularly China, of course, has, at least in rhetoric, maintained a multilateralist approach. And it is also taking climate very seriously. And so the question is, to what extent can we collaborate with China on these issues? And this is a particularly difficult question to answer because, of course, climate and trade policies are so closely linked. So we are putting a lot of our marbles in international climate change on a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which, you know, arguably uses trade incentives to, you know, promote the European climate action model externally. And so you know, possible idea might be to multilateralize, to extend this idea to create some plurilateral version of CBAM, where you basically let in other countries on condition that they have some degree of carbon pricing, for example, which China has, and then they're inside the club, they're not subject to the CBAM. So could we conceive of China being in the club like that, or is this completely off the table because, of course, we are super worried about China's overcapacity. We have just, had imposed countervailing duties on EVs and so forth. So that's the China question. And then my final question is, I have a long-term US question. And so the question is the following. So there's always a trade-off between economic security and efficiency. So, you know, ultimately we want to be in a world that's entirely free, at least as far as capital flows and trade is concerned. You know, specialization maximizes efficiency and growth, but complete specialization in trade means complete dependency as well. And so there is that trade-off, and we struggle with that trade-off. But with respect to the US, there's another trade-off which has to do with our political relationship with the US. So if we are going to want to reduce dependency on the US, we may not only face an efficiency loss, for example, in the military area, and replicating some of the common defense assets that we are currently sharing with the US, which is a duplication, right? So, the optimal arrangement within NATO would have been one where we remain fully specialized, except we, as Europeans, contribute more to the common effort, but there's still a division of labor within NATO. But we're not going to go there. We're going to go for higher European spending in conjunction with duplication, because we don't fully trust the US. Okay, so we have the security efficiency trade-off even in this area. But on top of that, there's this trade-off that worries me a lot as an Atlanticist. I grew up as an Atlanticist. I've lived in the US for most of my professional life. And so for me, the relationship with the US is really fundamental. For me, the US is sort of a largely successful European Enlightenment experiment on the other side of the pond, which unfortunately has gone deeply awry in the last year or so and beyond. And so the question for me is, how can we salvage the European-US relationship over the medium term, knowing fully well that some of the forces that led to the election in October are here to stay. But here the idea is that, you know, what we see in US policies right now, if you like, can be divided in three buckets. One is there's sort of traditional US-European tensions, for example, on the defense burden, for example, in the relationship to China, where simply the US has a different set of preferences and interests. Then there is the MAGA approach, so there's economic and political nationalism in the US, and some retrenchment, perhaps not isolationism, but a withdrawal, the America First approach, which is probably also here to stay, at least for some time. But then there's a third element, which is specific idiosyncrasies that have to do with the thinking of the current US president, which go back a long time into the 1980s, essentially. You can read these rather odd statements, this rather odd philosophy, his obsession with, for example, bilateral trade balance. I don't think that anyone who knows anything about trade, even if he or she is MAGA, would be embracing that. It's really an idiosyncrasy of one person. And because, everything is packaged in this one person, the rest of the movement takes it over. But I don't think this can survive, Marga. It's just too silly as a way of thinking. And there are a few others of those, right? So there's this specifically Trumpian element, and which I think will be gone, right? And so what we want to do is we want to see through at least that Trumpian part, and we don't want to do anything that would, in a sense, overreact to the Trumpian bit and then threaten our relationship with the US beyond Trump. And that is particularly difficult for me to imagine how we do it. And so how do we do this in practice? On NATO? So how do we ensure consistency with seeking less dependency with the future of NATO, which I think is important. We don't want to threaten NATO. The other area where it's super important is on information technology, right? We are highly dependent on the US there. We are highly dependent through firms that, by and large, do not share the values that we see in the US right now. They want to maximize profits, but if anything, in terms of their vision of how the world works, they're closer to us because they depend on trade. And then the third one, of course, is our financial dependency. Should we do anything there, and what to reduce it? So I've talked enough. I mean, again, you pick anything or invent your own question, and let's go in reverse order. Leena, why don't you start?
Oh my God, how to pick that apart, because everything is connected, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the US policy particularly, I mean, it looks like you discuss trade policy, but actually it is about, they say America first, but I think it's about manufacturing, it's about the Main Street rather than the Wall Street, and the bits and pieces that are there connect. So you can't really separate them, and I guess it's true for us as well. You started with the question on whether we can handle this fiscally, and it goes back to the question whether we can grow. No, eventually you need own funds to cover all this. And I think what was a particularly sort of a breathtaking moment for me was when US Treasuries took a hit in the market. Yeah. So in a situation where you usually see a sort of a run for security, so running for the US Treasuries didn't happen, but actually the flow went the other direction. And I think that's really a waking moment for all of us. Nobody's secure. We always thought that the US dollar would always be the one that everybody runs to when things go weird, and now it's not necessarily so. So we can't take it for granted that we have the strength there always in our own euro as well to be able to be attractive. So it does matter what we do on the public finances side, and fiscal stability matters. So we need to be able to reprioritize. And then of course, first you have to be alive in order to be able to fight the next battle, which is economic battle. So I think the security comes as a very high priority, which I understand the NEC to mean as well. The National Escape Clause was created. And there will be difficult discussions in Europe. We have 4 years now to see how we do this using the benefit of the NEC and not having to follow our adjustment paths the way we were originally in our planned to do. But the 4 years is a short period of time, and the debt sustainability analysis hasn't changed.
That's right.
So we need to do this, and we need to do the growth as well. So it goes back to the productivity gap that needs to be closed. And I guess, I don't know if it's a gap vis-a-vis US, because what they are doing in their economy is their business, but it's going to hurt us as well. But the internal market is a necessity to get flowing. And I think absolutely right by the leaders to say that we need the capital markets union, because we need also the private funding. But it's a tricky thing. And it's an open debate, and particularly, of course, the German view that you could have a golden rule on excluding the security spending altogether from it, but there is still the public debt you can't get away from. It's still calculated the same way, it's still be there, you can't remove it, and if you have a safe asset where to talk about that, you need own resources, which means there needs to be growth. So it sort of turtles all the way, no matter how you turn it around. So that's all I have to say about that. Now on the issue about Mar-a-Lago Accord and whether to do this differently, it's a really interesting debate. It gives everybody, all the economists, the pause as well to think what that means. I think what we do daily now is rather than just read through social, which is also important to follow, is to understand which people speak at the time. And it was interesting in Washington meetings, at the IMF and World Bank meetings, it was Secretary Besant that was present. And I encourage everybody to read his IIF speech, which is available, where you can read the flavor a bit. So perhaps from the Mar-a-Lago Accord towards a different approach, where you try to read, still sort of signing the reserve currency role of dollar, raising that the US first doesn't mean US alone, and issues like that. But definitely global imbalance is mentioned very clearly. Mm-hmm. I think we have to understand that we are not doing this through the market economy. This is politics, and it is statecraft and power politics. And I guess this is the European issue also to learn with China. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look for globalization and friendly nations and everybody agreeing on a rule base, that's probably not going to be the case for a while. So you just learn to do this diplomatically and finding the things where you de-risk and at the same time cooperate. And you should not turn your back. I think you need to work on this. But we are not very good at that.
I mean, the IMF tried to actually make this a big topic of the conversation roughly between 2003 and 2006, right? Global imbalances. And of course, the idea was very much everyone needs to do their own thing because this is dangerous. And so if we can converge on that, that would not be a bad outcome. No? Exactly. I would not be surprised if the fund actually jumps on this because they love the global imbalances, because they put the fund in charge as the coordinator for everyone to do something. No? Iikka, please.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'll basically pick up on global imbalances. I think as long as we have the second largest economy in the world, China, running economic policies, either by design or by accident, where both the savings and investment ratios are incredibly high, and savings ratio, I mean, as share of GDP, is even higher than investment, which results in current account surpluses, and then the investment goes into building more and more capacity in many, many sectors. And as years go by, then more and more sectors will be sort of oversaturated with Chinese excess supply in comparison to their own demand and global demand. I mean, we are ending up in a very, very different situation, or difficult situation, where I don't know if we have any tools to deal with that. I mean, if we look at the European exports to China, I mean, the trade policies have not changed. Our exports to China have stagnated since end of COVID. Their exports to us, our imports from China, have grown drastically during the past 3 years. I mean, this is not sustainable in that sense. I mean, they are sort of exporting their own problems, and since they're so big, it becomes everybody's problem. I don't have an answer to that. I don't think Mar-a-Lago Accord or anything like that would be an answer. I don't think the exchange rate movements can be big enough to really have a meaningful effect on the trade flows. I mean, it needs to come from inside China. I don't know if they are able to do that, but as long as they are not doing that, then we have a problem.
Do you think they want to do that at this point?
I mean, they pay lip service to that, but it seems that they are unwilling, or at least the current president is unwilling to make, say, significant changes in the way fiscal policy works, in the way social safety net works. I mean, they are basically saying that, if we raise the social safety net to European level, people will become lazy as they are in Europe, and they will not work, and then things will go sort of hell in a handbasket. Yeah.
Thank you.
Unfortunately.
Heather.
Yes, so these medium-term US and China questions are very much interrelated, and this is the tricky part for us. Because we see the way that long-term there is a bipartisan consensus in the US, MAGA and non-MAGA, everybody, concern about China. China is so much more important for all Americans than Europe is. Joe Biden was the very last post-war Atlanticist president. We're never going to see this again, even if we have a Democrat in the White House next time around. So we do need to accept this fundamental pivot away from Europe with implications for defense, as you've both been saying. But we also need to think about how the US-China relationship affects us. And this is unpredictable in several dimensions. This is the problem. I mean, I think there is a real danger that Trump has attacked his allies first. We thought he would go for China first, and then he would pressure us to follow suit. He would pressure us to be really tough with China. That would be very difficult for us as much more open economies. Then he would do a deal with China and dump us. And we'd be left with a much worse relationship with China than before, getting nothing from the US in return, right? So, and it's still possible he will play that game, right? There are many tricks up his sleeve. But now we're in a position where, for the moment, we have reasons to play very nice with China. There's been a notable softening in the rhetoric from Brussels around China. There's no more talk of de-risking right now. There's a lot of talk about embracing and working together on climate and working together on multilateralism and keeping the global trade system going. That works well on the domestics, in terms of our current diplomatic relationship, and I hear that there will be an EU-China summit in July, so I think there will be a lot of warm words this year. But as Iikka was just saying, the fundamental drivers of China's behavior as an economic and a geopolitical power will be domestic. They will not be to be nice to us, or even that much in reaction to the United States. The most important thing for the Chinese leadership is to deal with the challenges in China around growth, around demography, around climate impacts. By the way, China has huge climate impacts which are having a big effect on its economy. They're worried about all of their coastal cities being hit by extreme weather and sea level rise and so on. So China is serious about climate. They are serious about climate mitigation. They do want to see decarbonization of the global South, as well as their own economy. But the fundamental problem, the tragedy of the horizon for them, is dealing with the short-term problems. So what does that mean in terms of our relationships with the two powers? One is we have to roll with the punches. It's actually quite hard to do any planning on this, especially with somebody as unpredictable as Trump. But what we can do is to work with China on maintaining multilateralism, where that builds serious partnerships for us, which are partly other countries insuring themselves against China and the US. We're not the only ones in this situation globally. If you're Indonesia, if you're India, if you're Canada, if you're Japan, you are trying to work out how to manage between the China and the US, and your interests are actually closer to those of the European Union than you are to either of those two behemoths. So I think the potential for international partnerships, Leena was pointing out how many countries are actually seeking partnerships. Olli put up the slide earlier of how many free trade agreements we have with 72 countries. But the idea of building clubs of the like-minded on maintaining the global trading system, not necessarily as a system with global governance, but as a system which is maintained by the members, there are significant opportunities. There are also significant opportunities for building climate clubs. So, Jeromin, you talked about this issue of creating some kind of carbon pricing club through CBAM. There's been remarkable success. I'm actually quite amazed at how much the kind of carbon diplomacy efforts of the Commission have succeeded. How many countries whom you would have thought CBAM is the least of their worries have actually responded by building a lot more in terms of domestic carbon pricing. Even in the United States, California, Wisconsin, and other states are at sub-federal level are doing this. And China now has all of the prerequisites in place to have a serious domestic emissions trading system. The question is, will they have the political will to do it? And that's driven by domestic considerations. But the scope of their emissions trading system and the price could both be increased quite rapidly. It's a carbon intensity-based system, so there's things to work out. But it is possible that by the end of this year, when CBAM is about to come into place in January, we could actually have agreements on carbon pricing in place with a range of partners, China, but also others who are taking this seriously. So this is an interesting kind of hidden aspect of multilateralism that I think we could take more seriously, because we really have to think about coalitions of the like-minded rather than having some kind of permanent system, I think.
Thank you. Kristi, you get the last word before we go to the...
Yeah, well, thanks. Starting from the US and transatlantic relationship, your last block of great questions. Of course, Europe is not the one who is breaking up ties. I think this is very clear from our side. But we need to reduce our dependence, no matter who will be in power in the US after Trump. We know that this is also the expectation from the US side. Now, the dilemma is that we need to simultaneously increase our autonomy, but then at the same time still to keep the US engaged.
Exactly.
And also keep the ties so that in the time after Trump, there might be indeed a possibility to actually go back to a more normal alliance. But at the same time, we cannot be certain that this is what will happen. So we really need to prioritize this European building of autonomy, and it used to be just words for many years in Europe from the big European countries, and especially France, talking about strategic autonomy, where for me the main problem was always that we didn't have a shared threat perception, and therefore the understanding of what does it take for Europe to be strategically autonomous was just from the viewpoint of neighboring countries of Russia was not credible, what we had among our French colleagues who made these big words without really seriously investing in European defense capability. And I think we still don't fully have a credible response to this problem. It's still work in progress. But now the US is in a process of, I think, rapidly declining its global influence by its own actions. And this is also something that actually makes them in future a less relevant ally from the European perspective. I think this kind of long-term trend is the weakening of the relative power of the US. This kind of balance of power in the world is changing.
Don't we have a responsibility of saving the US from itself? No, I'm semi-serious. I mean, the US is a good friend. The US is like your brother who has gone temporarily insane. You still have to take care of your brother and then hope that your brother recovers, no? I mean, what we do
he doesn't
in
destroy
Europe...
the house in the process.
Of course, yes.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
and that's, yes, I mean, that's why I stressed NATO, that of course that's still the framework where we need to strengthen European defense and trying to keep the US on board, and we are not the ones who will kick them out. But we also need to be prepared for the possibility that at some point they just leave.
Yes.
And then we need to cope on our own. And perhaps the kind of bigger point here, which is difficult for Europe, is that we need to understand that economic rationality and considerations of economic efficiency do not prevail in the geopolitical rivalry. And this is the mistake that Europe made in relation to Russia, that we thought for many years that by offering to Russia economically beneficial partnership and support their modernization, we can have a partnership and somehow manage the relationship and manage the geopolitical disagreements. But for Russia, the geopolitical disagreements were the dominant factor that then determined their action, and they did not. They were not ready to make any compromises from their geopolitical goals. They were expecting Europe to make these compromises. And when Europe didn't, then it was a clash, and we are still in this clash now, and the European and Russian views of European order are incompatible.
Right.
I don't see that changing anytime soon. So with the US, this dilemma of how to manage the relationship, it's tough, but there is no alternative to Europeans strengthening their own autonomy and reducing the dependence.
Fully agree.
Now on China, very quickly also. Xi Jinping is in Moscow right now, celebrating with Vladimir Putin the Victory Day. And we should not be fooled to think that China's view on multilateralism is somehow similar to Europe's. Of course, there are elements of multilateralism that serve the Chinese interests, and there is some scope for partnership and cooperation. But still, China is an authoritarian major power. It's led by the Communist Party. It has very strong shared strategic interests with Russia, which doesn't mean that China might drop Russia at some point if it serves their interest. But so far, Chinese support has been critical for Russia to be able to wage war against Ukraine. So China, in that way, has actually become a major security problem for Europeans. And when we look at the time beyond the war in Ukraine, once that is over, there are signs that China will be very interested in coming into Ukraine with massive investments, because there will be huge opportunities there to invest in infrastructure, reconstruction. And Europe is going to struggle to find sufficient funds for that. Yes. So China will, of course, enter. And there we have to be very careful to see that Ukraine does not come to an unhealthy dependence, which would then allow China to kind of build the way the Chinese are very skilled at doing, kind of building their influence and kind of expanding then also their vision of the world and their kind of, I'm not saying that they expand their values, I mean, it's not really what the right way to describe it, but somehow increasing their presence and thereby also kind of becoming a kind of a threat to our democratic systems through their presence and through the way China defends its interests.
Thank you. All right. With apologies to the audience, you've been extremely patient. Let's take a few questions, please. So introduce yourself when you get the word. Gentleman in the third row on the back. Yes.
Okay, Kimmo Virolainen from the Bank of Finland. First of all, many thanks for the very rich and fascinating discussion. There would be a lot of good follow-up questions, but I will constrain myself to just one. It has to do with the title of the seminar, Green, and at least the resilient growth part. And now, one of the key recommendations of the Draghi report was that we need to find ways to make the goals of enhancing the industrial competitiveness and the green transition compatible in Europe. And he had a lot of very detailed advice on that, and the Commission seems to have taken quite a lot of that on board as well. It's still a very difficult task, and it's not just an economic issue, it has also some security aspects, as we heard today. So I would like to hear your views about the task at hand, and how do you see the way the Commission is going about it? Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question? Yes, please. That's right.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. First of all, Bank of Finland was putting in same seminar economy and defense, and thank you for the good panel discussion. My name is Esa Hyvärinen, still coming from a company called Fortum. The Finnish commander of the Finnish army, General Jaakkola, used an expression in one event a couple of months ago that armies win battles, economies win wars. Now we need to improve the defense side in European Union, but we are not doing particularly well, not in defense, not in economics. So if we start going towards that direction, will it kickstart a virtuous circle or vicious circle economically?
Okay, so to keep these manageable, these were enormous questions. I'm not actually going to ask everyone to comment on both, okay? So I wonder maybe Heather and Leena can take the first, and Iikka and Kristi can take the second, yes. But feel free to ignore my instructions. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
So just two comments perhaps on the way that the Commission is taking forward Draghi. I mean, one of the key thing that Draghi said is competitiveness and the green transition are compatible, are complementary if policies are aligned. And if policies are not aligned, we will waste an enormous amount of money and we will have slow agony. Okay, so he's very clear about that. Are we aligning policies? That's the key performance indicator we need to look at, both at EU level and at national level. And I think the danger is we're not. We're trying to do too many different things with the same money. So, 800 billion R&D investment, says Draghi, 800 billion defense investment. There are inevitably trade-offs in terms of the fiscal capacity that we have. And now, maybe we can enhance that a bit with debt financing. That's the sort of new solution. But fundamentally, we have got to think about what is going to build the resilience of the economy in the longer term. Now, and the key thing is about energy prices, which he identified as our biggest competitiveness problem. That is not going to go away because we are a resource-poor continent. We don't have the fossil fuels. We have to build the renewables. We have to build them with essentially Chinese products because those are the cheapest and those are the ones that are available on the market. So there are certain parameters which we can't change. But I think the danger is in the way that the Commission is going about it at the moment, that they're not presenting the trade-offs clearly enough. There's an attempt to try and square the circle by putting everything in different directions. We see this with the competitiveness compass, the clean industrial deal. And I'm concerned that there isn't enough focus, which is really what Draghi asked for. He said, don't spend money on industries which are going to go bust anyway. And I would argue that's where Germany has some very hard decisions to be taken, because if Germany maintains basically subsidization of energy-intensive industries in order to keep jobs in key constituencies that are essential for both the CDU and the SPD, then we could end up with subsidizing industries which in 10 or certainly 15 years won't be competitive if they continue to try and do, for example, primary steel production in Europe. So we've got to take some, Draghi presented some core data that we need to take into account. And the second issue is, I think that with the way the Commission is trying to do Draghi on a shoestring, as Jeromin has put it. So that's one thing, is spreading the money too thinly across too many different things. But the other problem is the omnibus approach. Now, what we are doing with the way that the Commission has put forward the current omnibus on sustainable finance is to remove transparency and data from public view. Now, both the investors and the insurance industry really need data about vulnerabilities in the supply chains. Double materiality, both transition risks but also physical risks in the value chains. We are now losing that data. We're losing that transparency. And even large companies, which will continue to be in scope, are complaining about that. So I think we've got to be very careful that what comes under the heading of simplification doesn't become a kind of deregulation which makes things less transparent and less easy to identify risks.
Leena.
What Europe is great about is still that we could, within the internal market, really emphasize the role of the private sector, and that's of course the point about the CMU and Savings and Investment Union as well, that we get the money flowing. I think we have to be close to our companies, to our banks and everybody, to be closer in understanding how we need each other. But that doesn't mean subsidization. It means there needs to be a choice done by the private sector in choosing the right investment opportunities to go ahead and do it. Now, the challenge is, as Heather rightly pointed out, there are these older manufacturing traditions which are politically extremely difficult to give up. And I have to say, and I'm not a politician, but try to help do our bit on the government official side to help them to do their extremely difficult job. And it's pretty clear that political stability is necessity for Europe to succeed. We can't start splitting within Europe now. And that makes this difficult. You can't do pure market economy. You can't just say new US technologies and forget about the rest. And by the way, the manufacturing doesn't create jobs as it used to. And if you do a really quick change from old to new, you destroy more. The question is, how do you then finance everything? So this is a balancing act, and it's going to be imperfect, but it's going to be a failure unless the private sector is involved. Unless the brains of finding the best technologies and integrating them to the older ones is done. So we need patience and somehow with the shoestring make everything happen. So that's why it can't be just public funding. It has to be the private one. Now on sustainability reporting, oh my God, I was sitting on a board of a company that was really eager to do it right according to existing requirements, and over half, so I think about over 100 pages, was about sustainability reporting. And then I asked an investor, whether they were now better informed about the sustainability. And they said, no, they are completely confused. They will never read it. It needs to be simplified so that the actual relevant information comes through. Now the question is, banks need that information to be able to, price things and report them. But there is a limit to way we do the reporting. And I guess this is about the European superpower, which is creating a lot of regulation, which is really cumbersome. We need to somehow, beyond the political compromise, and get to the point where we actually hit the right nail with that hammer that we have. And we haven't been really good at it. So I think there is a lot to do there. So I have sympathy for Commission's initiative on that.
Kristi?
I'll be very brief. Well, the rapid increase of defense spending, it can be a boost to the economy if we do it right. And as was said before today, defense and technological innovation, they need to go hand in hand. And this creates huge opportunities. When you look at Ukraine, the way their defense industry has developed during war, it's amazing. And it also shows the potential that defense industry has. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah, just very briefly on the same topic. I mean, there actually have been studies looking at the various ways military spending affects macroeconomy. As always, the answer is it depends. It depends how you do it. I mean, basically, we are taking resources and producing stuff, and we hope that we never use it. Okay. I mean, is that productive? Well, I mean, you have to be able to defend your country, perhaps. I mean, there are ways through R&D and so on that we have seen some spillovers, positive spillovers from defense spending, especially in the US, but also in Europe. But I mean, for example, in countries like Russia, for 20 years, they kept talking about how they will transform the former military industrial complex into sort of commercially viable machinery building complex. That never happened. So you need supporting institutions and so on. But we will have a very interesting national experiment at the moment.
Papers will be written.
Yeah.
Okay, we're at the end. Please give the panel a round of applause, and then I will give to the governor for last words.
Thank you, Jeromin. Thank you, panelists. Thanks to the audience, thanks to all of you for participating in this conference and doing it actively. Warm thanks to everybody. And before breaking for lunch, I won't give any long conclusive speech, but as a good PhD student, I took notes during this panel discussion, which was fascinating and important. And I summarized the panel discussion with 4 sentences, picking up from these interventions during the panel. So first, Kristi, to my mind, rightly and importantly pointed out that Europe must gradually take over its own security and common defense in the next 5 to 10 years in coordination with the United States, which is also an important economic opportunity for Europe. And I think you rightly also reminded us of the fact that as we meet here at the same time, President Xi and President Putin are discussing at the Red Square and following the military parade there. And yesterday's statements by President Xi were not that strongly reinforcing my confidence about his will to build bridges with Europe. Second, Heather made an important point referring to Mark Carney, how we should overcome the tragedy of Horizon concerning climate, concerning defense, and their different needs in terms of time consistency or time inconsistency, a very important matter. Iikka pointed out rightly, we often forget that international trade actually is good. And that's a very important, simple but important observation. We too easily go to the narrative of MAGA and Trump, and we should actually refuse to go with that narrative, indeed. And Leena, who made several important contributions, concluded by saying that we Finns, we are neither, we are sometimes pessimistic or realistic. There's not a habit to be optimistic, but we are resilient, and we have a resilient fighting spirit, a resilient fighting mood. I think that's a good way of concluding Europe Day, so that we have resilience to reinforce Europe, our security, our prosperity, our welfare, our human conditions. Let's continue along those lines, and as a sidekick, let's save the United States from itself. So thank you very much. Now it's time to break for lunch, and Elisa will give some technical information where and how to get there. Thank you very much.